Climate justice comes out of the concept of environmental justice, and it's a really complex field with that one exclusive definition. There are many that are working collectively to conceptualize a definition that fully encompasses the effects of climate catastrophe. That can include effects of racial justice, economic inequality, climate threats to island nations, etc. So as we dive deeper into understanding climate justice, we would like to introduce two premises developed by Work on Climate. One being the premise that climate justice disproportionately impacts, its disproportionate impacts are fundamentally unjust. And then two, that justice requires that climate change solutions address those injustices. Specifically, climate justice advocates and activists find that it's unjust that many who will suffer the most as a result of climate change are the most vulnerable to its effects, and they have contributed to the least to its causes, and that they're likely to be people from historically marginalized groups. An example of climate injustice. So I'm going to skip through this really quickly and go into the example of lithium and cobalt mining. An example of climate injustice is that its effects can be seen globally. And one example is lithium and cobalt mining on local communities. These minerals are used in batteries and tech hardware for our commonly used technologies like iPhones and electric vehicles. Much of this mining occurs in the global south, and it leaves behind negative impacts while the global north enjoys the positive impacts like supporting climate action initiatives, etc. The United States consumes about 1/3 of the total world's production of lithium and cobalt mining. And with climate injustice, these harmful health and environmental impacts stay within the communities that actually mine them, like the Congo, and hazardous deposits in the water source of lithium mining in communities in Argentina. Next, we'll go in a little more detail on climate justice and its power dynamics.
Yeah, thanks, Marwa. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate justice and power dynamics. So what you just learned is that climate justice is rooted in this idea that climate change's impacts are going to be disproportionately distributed, and that disproportionate burden is unjust. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the power dynamics in that and our analytical framework that we are proposing as ways of analyzing that justice or injustice. So what I'm going to present is this framework for how to look at power dynamics and injustice, and you can use it to analyze projects or situations or organizations or ideas. And at Work on Climate in our learning group, this was derived by Alicia Pegan and Alyssa Dyson from Environmental Justice Scholarship. Specifically, there's this guy Schlossberg who came up with the original formulation of sort of 3 different types of justice, looking at what activist movements were doing and how they were talking about injustice. And then Klinsky and Murvijani in Climate Justice and the Built Environment use these sort of 3 ideas of frameworks as ways of analyzing justice in different kinds of projects. So here's the basic framework, and then what I'll do is I'll kind of walk through each of these in detail a little bit more, and then we'll explore them even further in breakout groups. But here's the quick overview of the framework. First of all, distributive justice, who is harmed, who is helped. Procedural justice, who has power in decision making and who is left out. And then recognition justice, whose needs are seen or ignored in decision making. So why do we have this framework? Why is it useful to have these different lenses? Well, power isn't inherently bad, but how you use it can lead to bad outcomes. And by understanding how you have power and how your power is being used, you can make sure that you're not contributing to injustice, or can even make sure that you're furthering justice. So these lenses, these different analytical frameworks, are ways that you can spot injustice and prevent yourself from thinking in only one dimension of justice or injustice. And so you can make sure that you're looking at things from a number of different viewpoints in order to capture different forms of justice or injustice. So now let's kind of walk through these one at a time. Distributive justice is probably the easiest to understand. It's the one we kind of like most instinctually think of, at least I do. And that's basically who is harmed or who is helped by a particular action or program or initiative. And another way of saying that is, how are the benefits and burdens distributed? Klinsky says, are some people being protected from risks at the expense of more vulnerability for others? So to kind of continue with our lithium cobalt example, the benefits to lithium and cobalt mining are extensive and not insignificant. Lithium and cobalt are used to create lithium-ion batteries. Those batteries are powering the switch to renewable energy, and as a result are decreasing carbon emissions worldwide. They also power electric vehicles, which helps for transportation, and they power our smartphones, which means that we have communication and information exchange. So these benefits accrue disproportionately to higher income countries and to higher income people around the world. On the other hand, there are burdens. For instance, cobalt mining has terrible health consequences in the Congo. So as you may know, most of the world's cobalt is mined in the Congo. A lot of that mining is done by what are called artisanal cobalt miners, which are like basically people just working with hand tools. Cobalt is not a great mineral. It's pretty toxic. So people are literally poisoning themselves to get these materials for our lithium batteries. And some of those miners are children. In addition, lithium mining, as it happens around in different places around the world, including Chile, uses a lot of water, and that water means that you're depleting safe drinking water in certain areas of the world, including Chile. And there are also other environmental consequences of sort of doing this mining and stirring things up. And so there are burdens that are being imposed upon people in poorer countries, lower income countries, and the benefits that are accruing to people in higher income countries and higher income people around the world. So arguably that is unjust. So moving on to procedural justice. So this is a little bit more nuanced, but it's who has the power in decision making and who is left out. The disability justice movement in the US describes procedural justice as nothing about us without us. The basic concept is that people should have the right to be involved in decisions that affect them. Another way of thinking about this is who is in the room or who is not in the room when a decision is being made. So again, returning to our lithium example, so lithium mining projects in Argentina have left out local indigenous communities who might be affected by the water use and contamination. I think Chile as well, actually, and other countries. This was an interesting nuance brought up by Melissa. Multinational corporations, when they are asking suppliers to give them different kinds of materials, they often don't include those suppliers in those purchasing decisions. They just sort of present them as demands. And so lower tier suppliers are under a lot of pressure to deliver things quickly, which doesn't help with their sustainability practices or for their overall working conditions. And then, this is not directly related, but it bears mentioning. Part of procedural justice is representation, and large environmental organizations and NGOs that are working on the climate crisis in different ways. Their staff are often not very diverse. They are often reflective of white, cisgendered, higher income countries and people. And so representation is part of procedural justice as well. And then finally, recognition justice. So recognition justice is maybe one of the more subtle or complicated of the three, maybe the most subtle or complicated. But the way we described it is whose needs are seen or ignored in decision making. And there's sort of a metrics component to this, which is how do we measure success, or how do we track the ways that we are achieving our goals. But there's also another aspect of this, which is who do we actually see? Like, who do we value? Whose culture is valued? Who do we not see, and why do we not value them? Another, more bluntly, perhaps, who do we see as fully human, or who do we treat as if they're less worthy? So in our lithium example, do we see people in the Congo or Chile or Argentina or Brazil, different places where lithium or cobalt are mined? Do we see them when we use a lithium battery? Are those effects made apparent to us? Do we visualize these folks? Are we aware of the violence that is faced by local indigenous people who are protesting lithium extraction in Argentina? Are we aware that people's bodies are part of what is involved in this whole transaction? When manufacturers and suppliers are measuring their success, are they measuring their profit or their carbon impact or the number of batteries shipped? Are they taking into account these communities? And then finally, lithium mining itself can be emissions intensive. Do we measure that increase in emissions in a battery-based mitigation solution? So those are our three areas. So to sum up, distributive justice, who is harmed, who is helped; procedural justice, who has the power in decision making and who is left out; recognition justice, whose needs are seen or ignored in decision making. And so these three lenses, we think you can use these as lenses to analyze situations, organizations, projects for their power dynamics, as well as for the potential injustice.